The university cafeteria buzzed with its usual midday chaos as Dr. Zara Velfani adjusted the translation collar around her slender blue-gray neck. 3 months into her cultural exchange at Earth's premier xenobiology institute, she still found human eating rituals fascinating yet bewildering. Where her people consumed efficient nutrient cubes in silence, humans gathered in loud, chaotic groups, consuming an bewildering array of substances that seemed more chemistry experiment than sustenance. "Hey, Zara," called Marcus Chun, her assigned human liaison, as he approached with a tray laden with colorful items. The young graduate student had been endlessly patient with her questions about human behavior, though she suspected he found her clinical observations amusing. "Mind if I sit? I brought something special today." Zara's large, amber eyes tracked his movements as he settled across from her, noting how his pupils dilated slightly, a sign of excitement she'd learned to recognize. "Of course, Marcus. Though I confess, your enthusiasm for what appears to be standard nutritional intake continues to perplex me." Marcus laughed, the sound causing her sensitive auditory organs to flutter slightly. Human laughter still startled her species, communicated pleasure through subtle color shifts in their scales. Not these explosive vocalizations. "That's because you've never had something made with love instead of just efficiency," he said, producing a small wrapped package. "My grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. She made them for me to share with my alien friend." The term still felt strange. On Velthara Prime, friendship was a formal contract between compatible individuals for mutual benefit. But humans seemed to form these bonds spontaneously, based on shared experiences and emotional resonance rather than logical compatibility assessments. "Your grandmother is aware of my non-terrestrial origin?" Zara asked, her scales shifting to a pale yellow curiosity mixed with concern. The fewer humans who knew about the exchange program's true scope, the better. "Just that you're from very far away and have different customs," Marcus assured her, unwrapping what appeared to be several small circular objects. They were golden brown with dark spots and emanated a complex array of chemical signatures that made her secondary olfactory organs tingle. She insisted I bring enough for you to take some back to your home planet, though I told her you lived in the graduate dorms. Zara extended one long, articulated finger to touch the nearest object. It yielded slightly, and warmth radiated through her digit. "The thermal signature suggests recent preparation. Is this typical of human food storage?" "They're fresh from the oven," Marcus confirmed, his expression growing soft in a way that indicated emotional significance. "That's part of what makes them special. Here, try one." As Zara lifted the cookie to examine it more closely, she noticed Marcus watching her with an intensity that suggested this moment held importance beyond simple nutritional sharing. The object felt substantial yet delicate, and multiple chemical compounds created layers of scent that her analytical mind struggled to categorize. Little did she know that this simple act of cultural exchange was about to fundamentally alter her understanding of human nature, and perhaps her own. Zara rotated the cookie between her fingers, noting its irregular surface texture and the way light reflected off what Marcus had called chocolate chips. Her species had evolved on a world where food was scarce and precious, leading to the development of hyper-efficient digestive systems that extracted maximum nutrition from minimal resources. Flavor, as humans understood it, was an unknown concept. "The optimal consumption method?" she inquired, observing how Marcus held his own cookie. "Just bite into it," he encouraged, demonstrating with his own. The sound of his teeth breaking through the surface produced a soft crunch that seemed to please him. "Don't overthink it, Zara. Sometimes the best experiences come from just feeling." The word feeling translated poorly through her collar. Her language had 17 different terms for various states of physical sensation, but the human concept of emotional experience tied to sensory input, remained foreign. Nevertheless, she brought the cookie to her mouth and took a careful bite. First sensation was texture resistance that gave way to softness, releasing particles that dissolved on her tongue. But then something unprecedented happened. Her taste receptors, designed purely for identifying nutritional content and potential toxins, suddenly exploded with information they had no framework to process. Sweetness hit first, but not the simple sugar detection she expected. This was layered, complex, some compounds registering as sweet, while others provided depth and richness. Then came the chocolate chips, bitter and intense, creating a contrast that made her neural pathways fire in entirely new patterns. Salt enhanced everything, while vanilla and butter added notes her species had no names for. But the most shocking part wasn't the taste. It was what her body did in response. Warmth spread through her chest cavity, not from the temperature of the food, but from some internal chemical reaction. Her hearts began beating in a synchronized rhythm she'd never experienced. Most startling of all, her scales began shifting through colors she'd only seen in newborns, soft pinks and warm golds. That indicated a state of being her people simply didn't have words for. "Oh," she whispered, the sound barely audible. Her large eyes widened as she stared at the remaining cookie in her hand. "Oh my," Marcus leaned forward, concern flickering across his features. "Are you okay? You're changing colors pretty dramatically." Zara couldn't respond immediately. Something was happening in her brain, neurotransmitters flooding her system in quantities that should have triggered alarms in her internal monitoring systems. Instead, they were creating a sensation she could only describe as ... pleasant. More than pleasant. It was as if some fundamental loneliness she hadn't known existed was being addressed by this simple combination of flour, sugar, and fat. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. "This is merely a combination of basic nutritional components. Carbohydrates, lipids, simple sugars. There is no logical reason for my system to respond so dramatically." Marcus's expression shifted to something she'd learned to recognize as gentle amusement mixed with understanding. "Logic doesn't really apply to cookies, Zara. They're not about nutrition. They're about comfort, about feeling cared for, about ... happiness. Happiness, another poorly translating concept." But as she took another bite, savoring the explosion of sensations, Zara began to suspect she was experiencing exactly that. Asterisk, the biochemical cascade triggered by the cookie, continued to intensify as Zara sat in stunned silence. Her internal diagnostic systems were reporting readings that made no sense: elevated oxytocin analogs, dopamine surges, and neural activity patterns that resembled those of her species during their rare bonding ceremonies. All from consuming what Marcus casually called a snack. "Your grandmother," Zara said slowly, setting down the half-eaten cookie with trembling fingers, "she prepared this herself?" "Every Friday for the past 40 years, Marcus confirmed, his own expression growing softer. "She says cooking is how she shows love." I used to think that was just something grandparents said, but watching your reaction, maybe there's more to it than I realized. Love, the word struck Zara like a physical blow. In her language, there were clinical terms for reproductive compatibility, parental obligation, and social bonding contracts. But this human concept of love freely given, expecting nothing in return, expressed through small acts of care, was something her highly logical species had never developed. "Marcus," she began, her scales now cycling through rapid color. Changes as her emotional regulation system struggled to process these new sensations. "I need to understand something. Your species developed on a world of scarcity, did it not? Violence, competition, limited resources?" "Well, yeah," he said, looking puzzled by the sudden shift in topic. "Earth's had some pretty rough patches." Wars, famines, natural disasters. Why? Zara's academic mind began forming connections, even as her body continued its unexpected chemical symphony. My homeworld is ... peaceful, has been for millennia. We evolved past need, past want, past competition. Our food is perfectly nutritious. Our social structures are logically optimized. Our conflicts are resolved through rational discourse. She gestured at the cookie. We never needed ... This? Comfort, she whispered, the word carrying new weight. We never needed to find joy in simple things, because we never experienced sufficient pain to require consolation. We never developed the capacity for happiness, because we eliminated unhappiness so efficiently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her shifting colors with growing understanding. You're saying your people never learned to feel good because you never felt bad? Precisely. Zara took another careful bite, marveling as the flavors seemed even more intense now that she understood their purpose. This cookie isn't just nutrition disguised as pleasure. It's a survival mechanism. Your species learned to find hope and comfort in small things because you needed those emotions to survive devastating circumstances. The implications were staggering. Every human behavior that her species had cataloged as inefficient or irrational suddenly made perfect sense. The tendency to gather in groups for meals wasn't about nutrition, it was about emotional support. The human obsession with varied, complex foods wasn't gluttony, it was a biological imperative to find joy in the midst of uncertainty. We thought your species was primitive, she admitted, her scales now a deep blue of shame. You're emotional. Volatility, your irrational attachments, your tendency to make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. But you're not primitive at all. You adapted. Brilliantly adapted. Marcus reached across the table and gently touched her hand, a gesture. That would have been impossibly forward in her culture, but somehow felt natural now. And you're having your first real emotional experience because of my grandmother's cookies. That's either really beautiful or really weird. Zara laughed, actually laughed, the sound strange and wonderful coming from her throat. Both, she said, surprising herself. Definitely both. 3 hours later, Zara found herself in the small laboratory she'd been assigned, staring at the remaining cookies as if they were artifacts from an alien civilization, which, in a way, they were. Her colleagues back on Velthara Prime would never believe what had transpired. A simple baked good had fundamentally altered her neurochemistry, and more importantly, her understanding of what it meant to be sentient. She'd run every test she could think of on both herself and the cookies. The chemical composition was exactly what she'd expected: flour, sugar, butter, eggs, chocolate, vanilla, salt, and a leavening agent. Nothing exotic, nothing that should have produced such a profound physiological response. Yet her internal monitoring systems were still registering elevated levels, what could only be described as contentment. Computer, begin research log 847, she said, activating her personal recording device. Subject: unexpected neurochemical response to human comfort food. Hypothesis: the significance lies not in the chemical components themselves, but in their cultural and emotional context. She paused, trying to organize thoughts that seemed to flow more freely than usual. The rigid mental patterns of her upbringing kept being interrupted by waves of what she was learning to recognize as emotion. During my observation of human behavior, I have noted repeated instances of what appears to be inefficient resource allocation. Humans spend considerable time and energy on food preparation beyond basic nutritional requirements. They gather in groups to consume meals, often prioritizing social interaction over eating efficiency. They maintain strong emotional attachments to specific recipes, preparation methods, and food-sharing rituals. Another pause. Through her laboratory window, she could see the campus quad where groups of students sat on blankets, sharing food, and laughing together. Before today, she'd observed this behavior with detached curiosity. Now, she felt something she could only describe as longing. Previous assessment: this behavior represented evolutionary inefficiency. Revised assessment: this behavior represents sophisticated psychological adaptation to environmental stressors. Hypothesis: species that evolved under constant threat developed biological mechanisms to extract maximum psychological benefit from positive experiences. She picked up one of the remaining cookies, noting how the simple act of holding it seemed to reinforce the earlier neurochemical response. Personal observation: the consumption of this human cookie has triggered neurochemical cascades typically associated with social bonding, safety confirmation, and what humans term happiness. This response cannot be attributed solely to nutritional content or flavor compounds. Rather, it appears to result from the brain's interpretation of care, effort, and intentional kindness embedded in the food's preparation. The realization hit her with startling clarity. The cookie wasn't just food, it was communication. Marcus's grandmother, whom she'd never met, had somehow conveyed care, welcome, and acceptance through the simple act of combining ingredients with intention and skill. No wonder humans form such strong attachments to family recipes and comfort. Foods, they weren't just eating. They were receiving love in its most basic, nurturing form. Additional observation: my species eliminated suffering so completely that we also eliminated the capacity for joy. Without contrast, without the possibility of pain or loss, positive emotions have no context for development. We achieved perfect efficiency at the cost of what humans might call the soul. She set down the cookie and stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Her scales had settled into a soft, iridescent blue-green she'd never seen on her own body before, a color that somehow felt right, felt like her. Conclusion: humans are not primitive. They are perhaps the most emotionally sophisticated species in the known galaxy, having developed the ability to find profound meaning and joy in the simplest acts of care and connection. Their inefficiencies are actually advanced survival mechanisms that ensure psychological resilience in the face of uncertainty and loss. Tomorrow, she would have to file her regular report with the Veltheron Cultural Assessment Bureau. But tonight, she thought she might try baking cookies herself. The next morning brought Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the exchange program coordinator, to Zara's laboratory. The middle-aged xenobiologist wore an expression of barely contained scientific excitement as she reviewed Zara's overnight research findings. "This is remarkable," Dr. Hendricks said, scrolling through the data on her tablet. "You've essentially documented the first recorded case of an alien species experiencing what we'd call emotional eating. The implications for interspecies psychology are staggering." Zara nodded, her scales maintaining that new blue-green hue that had settled over her like a comfortable skin. She'd spent most of the night analyzing her responses, cross-referencing human emotional psychology texts, and coming to conclusions that would fundamentally alter her species' understanding of development and consciousness. "Dr. Hendricks," she began carefully, "I need to request an extension of my research period. And I need to learn how to bake." The human woman's eyebrows rose. "Bake? That's quite a departure from xenobiology, is it?" Zara stood and moved to the window, watching students begin their daily routines across the campus. "Yesterday, I thought, I understood the difference between survival and living. My people survive with perfect efficiency. But you humans, you've learned how to live." The cookie wasn't just food. It was hope made tangible, comfort given form, love translated into something that could be shared and consumed and remembered. She turned back to Dr. Hendricks, her large eyes bright with newfound purpose. "I've been studying human behavior from the outside," cataloging your inefficiencies and emotional volatility. But I never understood that these aren't bugs in your system. They're features. They're what make you not just intelligent, but wise. Dr. Hendricks set down her tablet, giving Zara her full attention. What are you really asking for, Zara? Permission to stay. Not just to study humans, but to learn from them. To understand. What my people gave up when we optimized away uncertainty and with it, wonder. Zara's scales shifted to include flecks of warm gold. And I want to take cookies back to Velthara Prime. Not for analysis, but to share. To show my people what we've been missing. The coordinator was quiet for a long moment, considering. You understand that your government might not approve of this emotional contamination? Zara laughed, the sound coming more naturally now. Let them call it contamination. I call it awakening. My people have spent so long avoiding pain that we forgot joy was possible. We've been so focused on existing optimally that we stopped truly living. A knock at the laboratory door interrupted them. Marcus poked his head in, carrying a familiar wrapped package. Hey, thought you might want some fresh ones. Grandma made another batch when I told her how much you enjoyed them. As he handed over the warm cookies, Zara felt that same cascade of neurochemical responses, but now she understood them differently. This wasn't just her brain responding to sugar and fat. This was her consciousness experiencing care made manifest, community offered freely, and the profound joy of being known and accepted. Marcus, she said, would your grandmother be willing to teach an alien how to bake? I have a feeling my people are going to need to learn about comfort food. Marcus grinned. She'd love that. Fair warning, though, she'll probably adopt you. That's kind of her thing. Zara's scales shimmered with colors that had no names on her. Homeworld, but which she was beginning to understand as contentment, anticipation, and something remarkably like love. I think, she said, taking a bite of the fresh cookie and savoring the explosion of flavor and emotion. I would like that. Very much. As she stood there, surrounded by the warmth of new friendship and the taste of possibilities on her tongue, Zara realized that sometimes the most profound discoveries came not from analyzing the stars above, but from understanding the simple acts of kindness that happened between sentient beings every day, that the cookie had been just the beginning. Asterisk,